So an official welcome to you from Weave Education. I'm Dr. Sherry Popp. I'm the Senior Director of Professional Development here at Weave, and we are very excited to have you join us. This is kind of our fall kickoff for Weave Professional Development. We have a full calendar of events coming up from now through December that we've planned for you. And this webinar is the first thing that we have on the agenda. Our title for today's webinar is Seeking Continuous Improvement in Your Institutional Effectiveness Process. And joining me today is Dr. Kevin Harris from Tennessee Tech University. I'm going to say a little bit more about him in a minute, but as we have a couple of more people joining, I will say that we are recording so that you'll have access to this webinar after the event is over. It'll be shared out with the folks who registered. It'll also be available in our Knowledge Center and our YouTube channel. And if you didn't know that we've had a YouTube channel, you should check it out. I'll put a link in the chat just a little bit later so that you can grab that, but all of our resources are available either in the Knowledge Center or YouTube channel, and we would love to have you find and use all the resources that we are preparing for you. So we're going to use that chat and Q&A throughout the session today. So if a question occurs to you as we're going along, I know Kevin has planned a few places to stop along the way and address those questions. So feel free to pop them in there and I'll kind of help moderate and make sure that he gets a chance to answer those questions for you. So let me take a minute and introduce our speaker. Today we have with us Dr. Kevin Harris, and he is the Associate Director of Institutional Assessment, Research, and Improvement at Tennessee Tech University. He has a PhD in Program Planning and Evaluation from Tennessee Tech University, and he supports the assessment and accreditation initiatives at Tennessee Tech and leads their institutional effectiveness reporting for instructional and non-instructional units. We get a lot of questions about administrative assessment, and so there's help to be had here for those folks. His research interests include aligning assessment and pedagogical practices, particularly in the area of critical thinking and the disaggregation of data for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I had the opportunity to meet Kevin first several years ago. Actually heard about him before I met him because he's previously done another Weave webinar for us on the critical thinking tool that was developed at Tennessee Tech. That's still in our Knowledge Center and you can find that. And then he joined us in a Weave Academy course, and he's actually going to say a little bit about that today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to share with us about the great work that's been going on at Tennessee Tech. Kevin.
Awesome. Thanks, Sherry. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and this audience. We have, I think, done a lot in our office over the last couple of years in regards to IE. It's kind of required that I learn a lot and that we learn a lot in our office to implement these practices. So very excited to share with you some of that information today. So as far as our objectives, I really want to focus on some potential problem areas, some things that we noticed were going on in our process that we thought, hey, if we can fix this, then we're going to see some significant improvement with what we're trying to do here. And then kind of recognize what some of these solutions might look like to these problems. Specifically, one of the issues we had related to timeline and training. So we'll take a look at some of the processes we put in place there. And then I want to talk just briefly about some benefits that we found from using grid reports that we're able to generate from our system. This kind of started just as a way to demonstrate or just to kind of show our reports in a better way, but it's led to some interesting training opportunities. So I want to share some of that with you as well. So certainly appreciate you spending this afternoon with us. We are located in Middle Tennessee, Cookeville, Tennessee. So I saw in the chat that we do have some other Tennessee schools with us. So glad to have you guys here. As far as the university, we are what's called a regional LGI. So we have our own regional governing board that we kind of respond to. As far as the size of the university, we have about 10,000 students, about 8,500 undergraduates, 1,400 graduate students, and about 76 academic degrees. Those of you that are involved with working with academic programs, you know that grows all the time, so they're always adding one or two here. But when I put this together, it's about 76. And we are accredited by SACS as far as our institutional accreditation. We do have some other accreditation components. We have a large engineering program on our campus. In fact, about 25 to 30% of our students as freshmen start in our engineering program. We also have a large teacher prep area. So we produce a lot of teachers for this area of Tennessee. We have a pretty large nursing program as well as all the other, College of Arts and Sciences with biology, chemistry, and the other degrees there. But just give you a little idea about our school. So just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page when I'm talking about institutional effectiveness, because I know some of us probably come from different accrediting agencies. I'm specifically focused on SAC Standard 8.2, and it outlines kind of three big components for institutional effectiveness. One, that we are and that our programs are identifying expected outcomes, assessing the extent to which it achieves those outcomes, and then provides evidence of seeking improvement based on the analysis of results. So this is probably very similar even in other accrediting agencies, but these are the three main components that we focus on as far as big picture, and then we'll take a look at how we kind of operationalize that with a few other fields or components within the report. Now, that particular standard focuses on educational programs, our general education program, and or our academic and student services. There's another standard, 7.3, that focuses on our administrative offices. Our office, Institutional Assessment, Research, and Effectiveness, handles all of those areas. So we not only do our educational programs, but we do all of our academic student service offices and our administrative offices. So we handle all of those components using the same process for each of those groups. So let me tell you a little story of kind of what we were working on and where we were coming from. When I was hired into this particular position, I'd already been at the university for about 12 years, but I was running a research center related to critical thinking in another area of the university. Sherry alluded to that earlier. When I came in the fall of 2020, we were getting ready to work on a 5th-year interim report for SACS. And as part of that report, we need to submit 3 years of reports for all of our educational programs, for all of our academic programs. We didn't necessarily have to worry about the other groups in that standard, just this one right here. And that was going to involve 64 academic programs at the time. And what we realized is that the process that we had in place had some holes, it had some big gaps. And so it took us about a year and a half, it took me about a year and a half of reviewing every single report, meeting individually with every single chairperson about these reports to get them reviewed and to get them revised to meeting the standard that SACS was looking for. And we were able to submit that document in March of 2022. And when we came around to the last SACS annual meeting last December, we were found to be in compliance. And so we were certainly very excited about being in compliance there. But we knew that we could not continue with the process that we currently had in place as we prepared for our 10th decennial review, our reaffirmation report in 2026. So we realized, hey, when we are now building up to this reaffirmation report, it's not just going to be our educational programs anymore. It's going to be all of these other units that also have to be included. We're going to have to include 3 years of IE reports for all of those groups. This is going to be about 170 annual IE reports. And we knew that the process and that the issues that we were seeing with the current system just were not going to let us do that effectively and ensure that we were meeting the standards that we needed to meet. So we tried to look back and think about, well, what were the issues that we were identifying in those meetings? What were the issues that we were seeing when we were reviewing the reports from the previous process? And what did we think we could do to improve on that process? And so this is some of the lessons that we learned from that review process, to which we developed a plan that we implemented last year. So one of the first things that we did is we realized that we had a somewhat complicated IE reporting template system. We had lots of different templates that were supposed to connect in this kind of interrelated way in order to produce a report. But that was pretty good in theory, but in practice, it just created this giant jigsaw puzzle that really didn't make sense once you fit all the pieces together. Very disjointed. And in fact, we found that because there were so many templates, that people were often forgetting to add certain pieces into their report, and so it would be incomplete. So we wanted to significantly the requirements to actually complete the report. We also realized that there were not a lot of connections between the different fields or the different templates. So when you had outcomes being assessed by a common assessment method, and they would be maybe tied together, there wasn't clear narrative about how that particular assessment method might have aligned with that outcome. So we didn't have clear connections between those different components, even when they were tied together within the system. We also realized that the way we produced our reports, the way we generated our reports out of the system that we're using was not really helpful in supplying feedback to units. And so we really wanted to think about what can we do to give feedback back to those groups so that they can make the changes that we're asking them to make. And really important to me was to develop a timeline for this reporting process that would keep people engaged and in the end make my job a lot easier. So let's talk about these kind of lessons and what we did there. So in simplifying our IE reporting templates, when we first, with our old process, we had 7 different templates that a user would need to use in order to create a report. And so you'll notice on here, we had a definition of unit. So the mission of the department was there, a curriculum map if it was an educational program. Each goal, outcome, and objective needed its own template here. Each assessment method had its own template. The results had their own. And you just had this kind of interrelated puzzle mess that was really difficult for people, for our users to understand and be able to look over. In fact, because it required so many templates, when a user would look at the system, look at their program, they might have 35 different templates that they were required to update or review just to complete their program. And that was just too much for them to handle. So what we did was to try to combine key pieces together. So why did we need 2 templates for definition unit and curriculum map? Couldn't we put those together in one template? When it came to our goals and our assessment methods, couldn't we put those together because they should be linked anyway? And the same thing with our results and modifications. So what could we do to simplify the system? Well, let's just reduce the number of templates that our users are going to have to use to create the report. So now, given that we have 4 primary templates, 2 of which primarily relate to our outcomes, assessments, and results, we at least halved the number of templates that are required to complete a report. So this was kind of a big part of our revision. Secondly, and this goes to that collapsing of the templates, we wanted to create clearer connections. So our two primary templates were our outcomes template and our results template. And now within that one template, a user would be asked to provide their outcome, the assessment methods that were related to that outcome, and the criteria for success that were associated with those assessment methods. So now we're tying together in one template the components that need to be related to one another, rather than having those as separate kind of distinct pieces. They're all together in one template, so you can see each of those fields as you're completing that template. And there's almost this linear understanding of these two fields need to relate to each other. Same thing with results and analysis. We wanted to ensure that when we reported our results and analysis, that those were linked to any modifications for improvement that we were doing. So by putting those fields together in the same template, we are trying to prompt people to know that these two fields need to relate to each other. We also, this kind of all culminated into the creation of a grid report. And this grid report comes out of our system. The majority of systems can generate a grid report for you. And so we set up our system to provide our grid report. You'll notice that the green components are from our outcomes template, and the yellow components are from our results template. So now, when we generate this report, our users and our reviewers can see the line of thinking. They can see the logic. They can see, okay, here's the outcome and the assessment methods that directly relate to that outcome. So it should make clear narrative sense for how that those assessment methods relate to that outcome. Also, criteria for success. We have our assessments listed. So what is the criteria that are going to be used to evaluate those particular assessment methods? It's all right here on one page so that a user can see those connections. And so the reviewer can also provide that kind of level of feedback. A question just came in about receiving a grid report template of the current site. Absolutely, we can definitely get that sent out. I'll be showing some other grid reports that are embedded into this presentation, but we can certainly send out some other handouts that I've developed as well. Same thing with the results and the modifications. So now linearly, as we run through this process, we've got our outcome, our assessment method, our criteria for success. We have the results that are associated with those assessments right there, so we can make sure all the assessments are there and that they are being evaluated based on the criteria. Once the results are there, we have some narrative about, well, what do those results mean and how are we going to use those results to go forward. So looking at this, many of you may be aware of your standard, 5-column report. We've heard about 5-column reports for a long time, and this is no different. This is a 5-column report, but for us, this was foundational. This was not something we had ever done before. It's not something the majority of our faculty had seen before. All they had seen are these big, long narrative reports where all the components were kind of disjointed, but now they can actually see the full puzzle and how we actually want to move from our program outcome to our assessment method, our criteria, results. They can see all those puzzle pieces kind of put together. So it's kind of like one of those duh moments, like, yeah, well, of course, this is something that could be beneficial, but we just weren't doing it. It wasn't something that was being done in the past. Another key, and this was extremely important for me, was this timeline for IE reporting. So within our timeline, we have trainings that we're going to be offering, but we also have a timeline for deliverables. In our previous process, we had one deadline, and that deadline was August the 31st. Your final report is due. And as you can imagine, we had, a lot of people that, would wait until the last minute to get that done. And when you're managing 170 different reports, that's really not a great idea. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to add in some deliverables so that I could understand where people were in their process and have these different touch points throughout the semester to make sure that people were doing what they needed to do. And so as it comes with the deliverables, we want everyone to have their definition of unit and outcomes templates in the system by February the 3rd so that we could evaluate those. We'll then send feedback or follow up to those people that don't get those in so we can make sure that they do get those in. The results and analysis templates are due by January the 28th. And again, we can follow up with units who have not completed those or at least kind of send some additional reminders to let people know these are due. And then that gives us roughly a month for the final templates and the final report to be due in August the 31st. So that's the season we're in right now, is me following up with people that maybe didn't get their results in or that maybe have some questions. It's no longer a scramble the week after, August the 31st, the first week of September, to get people to send in their reports. That we've had multiple reminders, and by now I know, hey, 90% of my people are in a good place, but this little group right here, they're the ones I'm going to spend the next 2 to 3 weeks communicating with and focusing on to make sure they get those pieces in. It gives me a lot more time to follow up with people. Also related are these training components. We did not have any consistent training prior to this last year. So we went through a complete training where everyone who is responsible for a report had to attend a training in October and a training in March. We held about 5 different trainings. It was the same training, just done over 5 different days to account for schedules. The October training was focused on that outcome assessment methods and criteria for success, those outcomes templates. So we did training related to those, and then they had a deliverable date of February the 3rd where we gave additional feedback. And then in March, we talked about the results and analysis templates, and then they had a due date of January 28th. So we provided that training, and then they needed to get those templates in. Lori, how many people are in your office? That's a great question. So we currently have 1, 2, 3, we have 4 people in our office, but 2 of those people are IR. So currently it is myself, and I have an administrative academic associate who helps me. I am hiring an IE analyst that I hope will be on board soon, and that they will provide kind of some support with that. We have a really good PhD program here, and I've had some practicum students that have been able to come on and help with me. But we wanted to create this program in such a way, knowing that there's only really going to be about 2 of us that are going to be running this particular program. Yes, all non-academic units have to complete the same report. The language may change a little bit when we're talking about student learning outcomes versus program outcomes, but the requirements, the process is exactly the same for everyone. So after this slide, I'm going to pause for a minute to see if there are any additional questions before we kind of move on to the next kind of piece. But some of the things that we kind of have learned from this: one, we had a lot of people that completed these reports that appreciated the training and the resources. They really want to do a good job in this, but it's almost like a foreign language. I don't think we're asking them to do anything that is outside of what they normally do on a daily or a weekly basis, but we're asking them to do it under a strange language. And so when we provide training that helps them understand how to put what they're doing within those boxes, within what they're doing on a daily basis, then I think they're much more comfortable and confident in completing the reports for us. So we tried to make sure we provided very good trainings and resources. So this is a screenshot of the resources that are currently on our website, where we had all of our slides and recordings of the trainings that we did. We had specific guides for writing outcomes and for entering in results and the use of results, and then video guides for how to enter all of that information into the system. So they could reach out to me. I was very much available, but they also had significant resources on our website to help. I do think a lot of our faculty, a lot of our groups appreciate having deadlines, because you don't want to get to the end of the year and be like, oh my goodness, I have to do this entire plan. So while we broke it up into small chunks, I think it's really helped people plan their year, and they don't get to the end of the year and have to really rush to finish this up. So I do think they appreciate having that timeline. I certainly appreciate it in any way. And the last, and we're going to get into a little bit more of this, is something that was really interesting. And we found that the grid templates provided us some excellent training materials. And we'll get into this again, as I said, but looking at having in the training people evaluate these grid templates, I think gave them a really nice perspective for knowing what we expected. What were our expectations? What is it that we were looking for, and how little tweaks and little changes could really improve a report and get it to the level that we were wanting them to be. So I'm gonna stop right here just for a minute and see if there are any questions before we move on to kind of the next part.
Looks like there's one popped into the chat that I'll let you take a look at there. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to mention, I'm trying to put some resources in the chat for folks. So check back to that. I added the link to Kevin's previous Weave webinar there that you can download and view later on. And also a link to an upcoming workshop we have with Linda Susky that focuses specifically on administrative unit assessment, which we know is kind of challenging because those folks aren't always really exposed to assessment work early on. And so they've got a little gap to close in how to do that assessment work. So Kevin, looks like we've got maybe 2 or 3 questions in the chat. Can you see those?
I do see the one about unit administrators or faculty coordinators for different units. How do we involve more people, and how do we involve, and I'm going to make an assumption that that's part-time faculty in there. So for every one of our units that thank you. For every one of our units, academic units, all of our chairs, so the head of the unit, of the department is the one that's responsible for making sure that the report for their program, for their degree program or programs are completed. They may, that's up to them, assign that to a faculty member, but that's at their discretion. For other offices, it's usually the director of that office or someone who's been assigned by the director. So I have a list of all of our units with the person that is responsible, the buck stops here person, and then a secondary contact if it's pushed down. Now, you're getting into some things that we're trying to do moving forward, and that's how do we involve different people? How do we involve more people in this process? Because as I'm working in this, I'm seeing that sometimes it is just the director, it is just the chair who's completing these reports, and they're not necessarily getting communicated down to other people, which can be really important when we're talking about implementing actions to seek improvement. And so we don't have anything that specifically involves those people right now, but what I would like to see and what I'd like to do some professional development on is how to have people have assessment result conversations with their groups. So, how do we sit down with our faculty members and share this assessment information that we are collecting for this process, and having those discussions about, well, what are some actions that we can take because I do feel like in a lot of situations, it's just the chair writing out that report. I'm not sure how deep those conversations go, and I would certainly like to see them go deeper. I do see the other question that popped up, but Sherry, were there some that I missed that are further up in the chat that you could help me with?
I think they were more just comments. So
Okay.
I think that we're okay to answer that one from Romina.
Okay.
And it looks like we have another one, just a comment from Chad answering the question, but we'll let you field it too.
No, I think that's a great, there was a point in time, and again, we have to kind of make decisions on what we can and what we can't do, where I wanted within this report to have a dissemination plan. So how do we disseminate that information? How do we disseminate the plan down into not only, our faculty, but maybe other constituents that might be interested? And so I think that's a great idea. And just an anecdote, I had conversations with the chair who's very busy. He was handling 5 different academic undergraduate programs and 4 different graduate programs, and trying to do all these reports. And it was like playing telephone, like, hey, I noticed that the results in this one semester for this one program, they trended up. So it looks like somebody probably did something. What happened there? Oh, well, let me go talk to people. And so it just became this game of telephone rather than, hey, well, let's just involve those people directly. And I would love to get into that situation, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. Who reads the reports? So I read every report, but we have a committee, the Institutional Effectiveness Assessment Committee, that will review all of the reports and score the reports based on a rubric that we have. So we have a kind of a meta assessment of the reports, and we collect that information. And so someone on the committee is providing feedback to the person completing the report. I am providing feedback to the person completing that report. And hopefully there is some overlap between that feedback so that we have some, maybe some movement. It's really hard sometimes it's really hard for me to be the only one giving feedback. It's nice when a colleague is giving that feedback, and that's kind of the point of this particular committee. Can I share that rubric? Yes, I can share that rubric. Let me make a note about that. So I do want to go ahead and move on to this last part. Quickly though, what training is required for our IE committee members? We do a calibration prior to the full review, where I send out a group of reports that people will score using the rubric, and then we'll come back and calibrate as a group before it gets sent back out. That's a really great question. Just like we had significant training with our all of our reporters in the last year, this training is going to be a little bit more intensive about providing feedback. There's certain actionable feedback that I think I would like to see, kind of priorities that I would like to see the committee focus on. And so that'll be part of our training as well. So just kind of getting back into this story of what we've been working on and talking about the grid templates, that was an area that we found really set us up for some really good training materials. And as Sherry has talked, prior to being in this role, I worked in the Center for Assessment and Improvement of Learning, and we disseminated a tool for assessing critical thinking. And I worked with universities all over the country and really across the globe on assessing student critical thinking performance and developing activities to help students learn those skills. And so I have a pretty strong assessment training background there. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to provide in our training opportunities that I thought would better prepare the people creating these reports to do that. And so I thought, well, one way to maybe do that is to have them review other people's reports and identify, are the components at the level that you would expect them to be based on our training and based on our conversation. And this, I think, helps us kind of fill in some of those gaps between, hey, here's the components of a report. Now I want you to go create one, to, hey, here are the components of a report. Let's review and evaluate a report that's out there for good qualities and bad qualities. And then I'll go kind of send you to generate your own to some degree. So we took some of the really common mistakes that I saw when I was reviewing reports for the 5th-year interim. We took some of those and built out some reports that definitely could use some feedback and use some help. And so what we have here is something that's very representative of a report that I would have received prior to the training. We have an outcome that's not really a great outcome. We have some assessment methods that could be really good assessment methods, but we may not have enough information about that. And then we just kind of have some information that's filled into the criteria of success field, but you know, that's about it. And so what we would do is in our sessions, hand these out and in groups ask the people being trained to kind of respond to these questions or to evaluate, because I mean, you know, faculty, you know, people in higher ed, I think they're very, very happy to evaluate and maybe even tear apart other people's work before they might do that to themselves. So, you know, we would go over the ABCD components. We talk about those pieces, and in this situation, ask, you know, are all of those ABCD components present? Can you rewrite this outcome in a way that more closely aligns with what we're looking for? And so they would kind of do that in groups. With the assessment methods, again, this is a prototypical response. So does the assessment clearly align with the program outcome? Or what other information would be helpful to better align that assessment? So asking those questions that we're really wanting them to ask themselves as they're completing their report about, have they provided the quality response that we're looking for? And so we would have them work in groups and report back to the bigger group. And then before they left for the session, we would give them a copy with the changes made. So they've got a really strong copy with an example of a good program outcome, a good assessment narrative, and criteria for success, so that they know exactly what we're looking for when it comes to the outcomes template. We did the exact same thing with the results template. So when we got to the results, we talked about what kind of information we're looking for in the results, and you know, how to display results. When we got to the end of those discussions, we would give them these activities. Hey, here's an example where we have a pretty good program outcome assessment method and criteria for success. And then here are the results and use of those results. You know, does this adequately meet the bar that we're looking for? You know, what else? And so we've got a minute or so. Looking at the results and analysis here, are there questions that you have? Are there ways to make this results and analysis better? If you want to toss those into the chat, maybe we can talk about them, or maybe even the use of results for improvement. I definitely think there's some ways we can improve this area. So I'll give a couple of minutes for you to put some things in chat. Yeah, a lot of common comments there. Yeah, sure, we have results here, but there's no context for those results. No real details about what's going on here. There's no contextual information. So no plan on moving forward. The use of results doesn't provide any details. We'll continue to work to improve response rates. That doesn't work for me. I'm glad it doesn't work for you guys. It doesn't work for me either. How are we going to try to improve those response rates through that communication? One of the big things that comes up is we achieved a 47% response rate for the fall semester, but what about previous semesters? What's the trend that we're seeing in this particular situation? That would be a big question that I would have. And exactly in the use of results for improvement, I think what they have here is very weak. What are the actions and that are going to be taking place there? Maybe who's responsible for those actions? Some of those components. So let's take a look. This I think is a pretty good example of where we might want people to go. One, let's see some trend information. So, and this is real information from our office. This is something that I've been working on for a while. So, we see the trend information for our response rate, and yeah, it was 47% in the fall, but hey, we're moving in a good direction there. It's going up. We didn't hit our 50% threshold, but the advent of additional messaging and reports, can be contributed to a significant improvement there. Same thing with our non-response rate. We've not met our threshold, but we have certainly seen some improvement there. So we have a little more context. And so when we take a look at our use of results and improvements, we talk about the awareness that we've been doing. So we evaluate those actions that have already taken place. And then what are we going to be doing going forward, and maybe being a little bit more specific about, we're not asking for a novel. We're not asking for a thesis on the topic, but additional context as to what's going on. So this was a key part, I think, in our training. And then I think getting people to really understand what we were looking for, setting those expectations, because I do think when people understand the expectations, they're going to be much more confident in the quality or in the product that they're submitting to you. So just kind of to finish out here, one of the things that we're really trying to work on, and I know the majority of people are trying to work on, is building a culture of assessment. How do we do that? Certainly we have to complete IE reports because it is a requirement of our accreditation, but we don't always want it to just be about accreditation. At some point we want it to be useful. So one of the things what we're trying to do is provide feedback. So in September, as I said, our IEAC committee will review all of the IE reports from the past year and provide scores and, as I've said, actionable feedback to help improve what our units are doing. We're going to continue to do our training. One, for those of you involved in this area, you may know there tends to be a lot of turnover. And so we want to make sure that everyone is trained. So all new people would be trained. And then we also want to provide additional context as maybe some of those common issues that we're seeing. And so we were just having discussions this morning about how certain people have some confusion on how to technically enter some of the information. And even though our resources go over it, and even though we've talked about it, it's been a common enough issue that, well, our next training really needs to talk about that and really needs to demonstrate that in some way. So we're going to continue with our trainings for our units. Who is part of this committee? So for the IEAC committee, it is made up of chairs in the academic programs, those who are completing those reports. We have about 2 chairs from each college that will come in and help us with this evaluation. And then we have about 2 directors from each division to come in and review. And so yeah, we do not combine administrative and academic units. So our academic chairs will be the ones evaluating all the educational programs. And then the directors that come out of our other divisions will be the ones evaluating the administrative units. So providing this feedback, providing that training, we really hope that that's going to increase confidence. We want people to feel adequately prepared to produce these reports. So by doing this training, we really feel like that will lead people to maybe understand the process that we're going through a little bit more, understand the value of what we're trying to do. One of the things that we talk about a lot in this position and IE in general is that our job is about building relationships, because we don't really, we rely on other people to get that information. So the best thing that we can do is to have high quality relationships with these groups by helping, in any way that we can and providing that guidance and that feedback. Are units receptive to that feedback? You're always going to have those units that maybe are not as receptive. For the majority, I'm going to say yes. So in those times when I have a unit that maybe isn't as receptive, I try to lean more heavily on the IEAC committee reviews, so that it's not just coming from me, especially somebody who's not in an academic college. It's coming more from a colleague. But in the majority of situations, I do think people are pretty receptive to that feedback, especially as it maybe relates. We have a lot of secondary accreditors. If you can relate it to those secondary accreditors, then it gets really, really helpful. And then the last thing that we're really trying to build up to is this follow through. And this is something that I've noticed a lot of institutions struggle with. We struggle with it. I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and James Madison University, one of the top when it comes to assessment and IE, they struggle with it, is that we're documenting actions that demonstrate improvements. When groups say, yes, we saw that this was a problem, we're going to do these things next year, we don't want to get to next year's report and be like, yeah, we forgot to do that, or, oh yeah, we didn't do that. So anything that we can do to help with that follow through is key. So one of the things that we have as the last component of their report that's turned into us is called the summative evaluation template. And it's merely a summary of the actions that they say they're going to take over the next year. And so throughout the year, as we communicate with groups about, hey, have you submitted your outcomes for the year? Have you done, these pieces? We can follow up and say, oh, and don't forget about these actions that you said you're going to take place, that you said were going to take place. Make sure you're taking care of that. Make sure you're able to respond to that next year, so that hopefully we do have some follow through there. Let's see. Sorry, I'm reading through some of the chat right now. Use evaluation, achievement, learning outcomes. Yes, this process evaluates the achievement of learning outcomes from our academic programs. So in fact, for our academic programs, we require 3 to 5 student learning outcomes. They can have program outcomes if they wish, but 3 to 5 student learning outcomes specifically to evaluate the achievement of learning outcomes there. By we, you mean the committee following up with them. The committee, yes, to some extent, will follow up with feedback directly to the units that they're evaluating, but mainly when I say we, I mean our office, the IARE office would be following up, making sure that people are aware, so that in the following year when we evaluate the reports, there's some continuity that, well, we said in the last year's report we're going to do this. Does this year's report reflect that we actually did that? So there's some follow-up there. So with the units be. So our breakdown of units is taken from our institutional org chart. And there are some broad overarching departments, but in a lot of situations, they're broken down. So for like student affairs, we have an Office of Student Engagement. We have some other offices within student affairs that will have their own reports where they have their own 3 to 5 program outcomes. Within academic affairs, obviously each of the colleges would have their own, but there are certain offices, including our office under academic affairs, the Women's Center, records and registration, and those under academic affairs that would have their own separate plans. So yeah, for the most part, each individual department does their own plan. There are some areas like with facilities, we didn't think it necessary to break facilities up into all the different units. So we may just require that facilities has a program outcome for environmental health and safety, and one for planning and some of those pieces. Who does the tracking and the reaching out? That's going to come out of our office. That's going to come out of our office. That's something that we're going to have to do there as far as tracking. I will share that this is the first year that we'll be getting that summative evaluation template complete. So it's going to be a learning year. We're going to see how difficult that is. We may have to change that process as we go forward. Yeah, follow through is tough. And that's what we're going to be learning over the next year is what it's going to take to get that follow through moving forward. So this year, reporting template included information from the most recent assessment, if there was one. That's kind of the idea I think we're going for. I think it would be pretty good if we were able to put the summative evaluation from last year's report above this year's report when it's being evaluated. That's something we're going to have to kind of figure out as we go through. Yeah, and as we get, I think, more consistency in using the report template, that grid report template, I think it's going to be a lot easier to quickly look back and see last year's report and next year and maybe the current year's report to do a lot more of that evaluation. Prior to the grid report, we had a very long just Word document, and pieces were not always related together. So it could be hard to find that information. So that's one of the things that we've tried to do to make that a lot easier. Are the templates automated? They are automated out of our system. They are outputted in a Word format. And then I have a graduate student that works with our office who will go in and have to reformat them a little bit, usually to make sure, we try to make sure each outcome and results is on one page by itself. So it helps to size everything well. So I'm glad to keep answering any questions that you have, and stay on and help in any way that I can. We do use a different system from Weave. It is kind of a function of it was already what was in place when I started, and we already had a contract, and I've been told we will use that until we get our reaccreditation, reaffirmation report in, but it is not the best system in the world. So, but you make do with what you've got.
Thanks for handling that question well. And I think it's fair to say there's no perfect system out there, but a lot of what you are trying to do can be accomplished in Weave. And I put a couple of comments in the chat regarding the 5-column chart that you have. So Kevin, thank you so much for all of that rich information and very practical information. It's one of the things that we focus on is practical solutions to very complex work. So I also put in the chat just now, you had mentioned about your participation in our Introduction to Effective Assessment Practice course. And we have another section of that starting in just a couple of weeks, and plenty of seats open for folks. If you have someone who needs to get really grounded and go through the process and come away with a project that they could actually implement on campus. And that's the whole idea of it. So,
and to jump in there real quick, that when I did that class, that project is one of the things that our current system is based off of. Because it gave me kind of some time to really sit back and think about what would a good process look like. And so it was really, really beneficial to what I think we've built out now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And a couple of people who've been in that class are chiming in the chat. And also on the call with us is Joy Medford, and she's one of our instructors who's taught the class before. So we'd love to see you in there. I think we have one more slide too that has a QR code that you can scan. So if you missed any of the things in the chat and didn't get to download or grab the links, you could just scan this real quickly and use that to sign up for our Weave Connections newsletter. And that way you're always informed about the upcoming events that we have going on. So Kevin, we cannot thank you enough for your time today. And thank you to everyone who took some time out in what is surely a very busy week at campuses all over the place to join in and get some practical information. Kevin had his email on that previous slide he said you're welcome to reach out to him. He's happy to share resources. I'm happy to answer questions as well. And we will hope to see you all again in our next Weave events. So best wishes to all of you for a smooth start to the semester.